Sheep farmers live their lives around the requirements of their sheep. So, sheep come to represent the skills and abilities of the farmer. In this respect, sheep express a significant dimension of a sheep farmer's identity. But while Scotland has a rich heritage of sheep farming, there's a worldwide climate crisis, and some farmers feel pressure to replace pastures with forests.
Absolutely, the practices that are used in agriculture and farming have to change, have to become much more energy efficient and environmentally friendly.
Jeremy Corbyn, you announced 2 billion trees by 2040. Today, that's 100 million trees a year. How are you going to plant them? Where are you going to put them?
I'll leave you a copy of this afterwards.
Well, where are you going to put them?
Scotland is absolutely leading the way. Last year, 22 million trees, more than 11,000 hectares. That was 84% of the total number of trees planted across the UK. We need to increase that number.
Yes, that tree planting will take place in national parks, in existing forests and on farmland all across the country.
Farmers are an important part of the climate change that we want to create because they are custodians of the environment and we should be involving them as allies rather than decrying them as the enemies. I think you're the only one who's gone.
In front of me is the Scottish Government's forestry strategy for the next 10 years. In it, the Government aimed to plant around 170,000 hectares of new forest by 2030 in order to tackle the climate emergency and transform Scotland's rural economy. Throughout the next few weeks, I'll be speaking to academics, policymakers and proponents of rewilding schemes to see if these pledges are achievable or if there's a better use for Scottish land.
And I'll be talking to sheep farmers across Scotland. There are difficulties and opportunities presented by integrating tree planting with traditional sheep farming. Here in the Highlands, the vast majority of the land is classified as less favoured area. This means that the primary forms of agriculture can only be hill sheep farming or forestry. So, to understand where these industries are going, we first have to look at how sheep farming came to dominate much of rural Scotland. Tell a Highlander that you know how to use their land better than them, and you're unlikely to receive a friendly response. That's because in the early 1700s, small-scale subsistence farmers, or crofters, were told exactly this. This resulted in evictions and mass emigration, with tens of thousands of Highlanders leaving their homes. In the first phase of the Highland clearances, sheep replaced Highlanders, as landowners could earn more money by selling lamb to urban centres than by collecting rent. Then, throughout the 1800s, large hunting estates replaced many of their tenants with deer. These are the two main species that are now preventing saplings from taking hold and chew down much of the landscape. That's why many people want to see these species controlled. And, ironically, sheep are now so entwined with the land that Highlanders are worried that more communities will disappear if their sheep do. This video is from 2009. And shows many of the same fears of farmers today.
Sheep production on Scotland's west coast looks like it's on the way out.
The prices that we've been getting in the last 13 years, especially since the BSE outbreak, it's caused us a clearances virtually, a new Highland clearances really.
I know of 2 farms locally where the sheep are about to disappear and several of my neighbours and myself not getting any younger.
Since this video was filmed, the amount of agricultural land that's used for rough grazing has stayed largely the same, at around 50%. However, there has been a steady decrease in the number of farms registered, as well as a doubling of woodland cover. Finlay McIntyre is one farmer in Perthshire who believes rural communities are still struggling in Scotland.
We've already lost a lot of community in these areas because there's so many few people that are still farming, and there's a great tradition going back through many years of hill farming communities of neighbouring. So we would start at one end of the glen and work and handle sheep, and you'd come to the next farm and everyone would come with you and work to the next farm and the next farm and the next farm, and it was great. And you know, great fun, great capers was had in these days, and there's a lot of people. But now there's just so few people, it's turning into a thing of the past, which is rather sad. And it's so important that we don't just glibly make promises to plant, which many parties do. And, you know, there is a place for commercial forestry, there is a place for, you know, native woodlands that will benefit, our ecosystems. But two, there is also a place for the livestock that grazes these hills.
The loss of highland communities is certainly bad news for residents, but it may be good for the environment. Rewilding, also known as ecological restoration, is an approach to conservation which allows nature to take care of itself. It enables natural processes to repair damaged ecosystems and restore degraded landscapes. Prominent rewilder Alan Watson Featherstone says there is enough land in Scotland for all uses, but warns that farmers may need to relocate.
There's space for all of those things, but they need to be positioned in the right places. So let's concentrate the farming in the lowland areas where the soils are better, where farmers can make a decent living, they can get a proper return, and the uplands should be covered in forest. Those sheep graze, they graze over large areas because there's so little to eat, and when they're ready for market, they're sold on, and nothing is ever put back to replace the nutrients they've extracted from already depleted soils. So we're subsidising the ongoing destruction of our land. Do we, as people in Scotland today, want to pass on to our descendants this depleted, wasted, ruined landscape that we've inherited from the past? Or do we want to return it to health, to vibrancy, to greater diversity and beauty, within which people can live richer lives? Maybe not richer in a material sense, but richer in terms of going and seeing wildlife, seeing healthy forests, seeing landscapes that function properly.
So, some prominent voices believe that to restore the health of our environment, farmers may have to leave their homes in the Highlands. Donna and Donald Gillies own a small farm up by the Dornoch Firth. We asked them whether they fear being displaced if farmers' views aren't heard.
I think that if the rewilders had their way, that would happen. I think also that if Westminster picks apart devolution, that could happen.
The one thing that the Highlands in particular has lost, it's lost people. It's lost a huge amount of people. They all moved down into the centre belt. They're all focused around Edinburgh and Glasgow in that area, the industrial areas. They came from the Highlands.
So clearly there are concerns about the increase of tree planting and what it could mean for the already depleted farming communities of rural Scotland. However, there are possibilities for the farmers and foresters to work together. The Scottish Government has introduced the Forestry Grant Scheme in order to persuade farmers to create new woodland on their pasture. According to the website here, the grant offers on average £4,000 per hectare, so there definitely is a financial incentive for Scottish farmers. The scheme offers support for those farmers who are willing to integrate forestry into their agricultural practices. This is known as agroforestry. Many believe that agroforestry is the best route of action to satisfy the needs of both the farmers and the environment.
Scottish Forestry is trying to increase tree cover in harmony with existing farmland. Brendan Callaghan, the head of operational delivery, explains how this works.
Farming and forestry, most of it's positive because most forestry is going into farming in an integrated way. And there's a range, the support measures in place. Agriculture gets various support to encourage farming and try to improve the economics of farming, keep people on the land. Forestry gets, in the main, a capital grant to contribute to the massive cost of planting a forest.
Donald Barry of the Hutton Institute has been researching agroforestry techniques on his research farm Glen Soch since 2001. Despite the many apparent benefits, Donald is unconvinced that most farmers have the means to make it work.
I think what the politicians haven't picked up on is the amount of time and energy that is required to create that. And by energy I mean human labour and resources, and I've already mentioned the plastic. Politicians must recognise that we're living in a rural environment that is to a certain extent starved of labour. We know that we have an ageing farm population, and I also know as a farm manager that labour is difficult to recruit and expensive to pay. So we have to be careful that we don't create a system that demands more labour than we can realistically put into it.
But what about farms who don't have the workforce for agroforestry? Calum went to Couple of Hills Farm in Fife, where they've turned what was once poor quality grazing into a community woodland by using government grants.
By planting these trees, yeah, we've got an income that's been generated. I think we got a grant, the Farm Woodland Premium Scheme, and there was an additional grant on top of that time. So you got a top up for creating a community woodland, for providing benches like this, and there was rubbish bins placed throughout so people could put their litter in their dog bags, etc. We got a top up to the grant from that, and that, yeah, it just made it all the easier. It was easier to make the decision to plant the trees, essentially. Rearing beef and sheep and the numbers that we were doing, we were only talking 40, 50 store cattle and 150 odd sheep. It wasn't financially viable to keep those going all the time, so we made the decision to put them off to reduce the workload, but to then convert the old pastures, which were permanent pastures because this land here, some of this land is unploughable. We basically decided to turn it into trees. So the reason for doing that was, one, financial, but also Dad wanted to leave a legacy, and that legacy was to create a community woodland that the local population from Balmullo, which is just a mile down the farm track there, could enjoy.
Another alternative to planting trees for forestry is not planting trees at all. Back up in the Highlands, Donna and Donald chose to protect the ecological diversity already on their land, and were able to access different government funding by doing so.
Our arable, which would be eligible to think about investing in any kind of timber, is quite small actually. And for us, it's more important that we keep nurturing the diverse landscape that the farm already has. So we wouldn't ever go for a grant that would be about mass tree planting. What we have done and were successful at was we went for an agro-environmental scheme grant, which actually is supporting us to encourage the health of some of our woodland and our fields.
However, Brendan Callaghan is seeing many small farms, just like Donna's, take advantage of specific tree planting grants.
The vast majority of our projects are under 5 hectares. Obviously, you need a lot of projects at 5 hectares to be the same as one at 200 hectares. We don't really discriminate or target, and in fact, most of our effort and that support that I've described and the focus of those initiatives is all at the smaller end.
For wider society and certain farms, tree planting offers great financial and ecological benefits, but scars from the highland clearances remain.
And some farmers fear that their land, culture and livelihoods could get swept away by the rush to plant trees. The Scottish Government are aiming to plant another 10,000 hectares in 2020. So supporting farmers throughout this process is crucial if we want to preserve their communities.
But a lot of farmers just don't want to stop farming and put trees in place. What's he going to do? I mean, a lot of farmers, while they're multi-skilled individuals, their heart and soul is farming, and if you just cover your land in trees, what are you going to do?
Although my background is in land management and therefore I like to think I can take a broad view of these matters, it still hurts me to see what my family would have considered to be a good hill farm being taken out of production. So I'm very keen, if I can, to find a third way where we can have the best of all worlds.
I'm so invested in hill farming. I think it's my passion. These hills, when you're out in them, when you're working with the sheep, you know the cattle that's grazing them, you know the sheep. You'll know, you'll see a yow lambing and you'll remember when she was lambed. You'll remember, maybe, you won't remember them all, but you know the particular ones. It certainly can put your mind at rest. There's a lot of hardship, and when the weather's bad at lambing time, I can tell you sometimes I wished I was doing something else. But I wouldn't trade it for anything else in the world.